You're tuned in to RX Radio.
So maybe we should start with a little bit of a brief introduction here. Jorge de Hoyos. You've been part of the Prescript family for years now. It's always hard for me to put kind of a time span on this stuff because I don't know. It feels like I've known you forever, to be honest. I don't know. But we met. When was the first time we met? Was it October 2020 in person? Was it
it was after that. It was like Mind Pump, I think.
Was it? Oh, dang. It wasn't until 20. That would have been what? Early 22?
21? I don't know. Dude.
Who knows
like, this pandemic made me like lose notion of time.
Yeah. But you've probably been to more of the Prescript intensives than I have at this point.
Yeah, a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome. Came out Vancouver last time, helped us teach. So you're part of the family. You're part of the team. So it's great to memorialize this with the podcast. And I love your setup. Every time we hop on a call, you're just in the library with a set of encyclopedias behind you. Amazing.
None of this is mine.
Couldn't be anything.
Yeah.
Just own it, man. Just lie. That's all the internet is anywhere.
I've read all this, you know?
Yeah, and that's why you're as smart as you are. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for taking the time for being here with me today. Let's kind of just kind of dive into it. I didn't really have anything planned for this, like we never do. But out of my own interest, I want to know what brought you here, because every time I see you, you get larger. And from what I understand in talking to you, in Mexico, there's not that big of a strength culture, right? Or a training culture. It seems like it's something that's a little bit, I don't know. It's a little bit less common, especially than what we see in the States and maybe some of the other countries that we've been in through Prescript. So what interested you and what got you into hypertrophy training or strength training in general?
Yeah, for those of anyone listening that don't know, I live in Mexico, so this is why Jay's referring to all this. But yeah, like strength, I would say like it's a more bro-ish culture, if I could say, you know? Like there's definitely a growing, it's growing on that side, but there's not a lot of like high level information available. So it was just, at first I got into lifting just for football, like trying to get bigger. And then I just kind of fell in love with it and kept going down the route. And at the time, I read everything that was available to me that I could find, which was like basically bodybuilding.com, you know?
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Where we all started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then it kind of just evolved, you know? I moved. I met people that were like involved in strength sports at a higher level. They introduced me to like new sources, new people. I had some good training partners. And then I eventually found you guys. I read, I binged all the YouTube stuff. I listened to all the podcast stuff, and eventually I just ended up going to the events, meeting everyone, and now kind of working for you, you know?
And now you're like 100 kilos and rock solid. You gotta be more than that now. What do you weigh?
Mac has me cutting down a little. I'm like 102 right now-ish.
Okay. All right.
We want to get up there.
I know. I think you said 125 was the goal or something.
That's the goal.
That's fucking absurd. Awesome. That's and that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to hear the origin stories that, you know, really no matter where you grew up, how you got introduced to it, it's a lot of times it's the same shit, right? And I think that's why, you know, in meeting you and not knowing how long it's been since I've actually met you in person, it just feels like I've known you for so much longer, because it's just such a familiar story. Is that our past in this and the reason that we got into it and our ideals and values around, you know, maybe life in general, but absolutely training, there's a lot of similarity there. And I think that's why there's a lot of things kind of resonate. You know, it's pretty easy to have a conversation. We get along really well. We both abuse caffeine. So it's always cool to see, and it's always great to meet people that just have those similarities with you. I guess the big question for me to you is, growing up in that kind of culture, getting introduced through sports seems like a pretty, like I said, familiar story. It's an easy introduction into strength sports. what do you notice? Because you lived in Vancouver for a while, you've been to the States plenty. What do you notice in terms of, you referred to the strength culture in Mexico very broy, versus how
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that different from in the States, which, I think broy is kind of the vibe we get wherever we go. But what is your brand of that you've seen in Mexico? Because there are different feels to different gym atmospheres, different places you go in the world, and I've noticed that. Um, but I just want to know what that means, and kind of what maybe some of the norms are, because you kind of hinted towards it's less forward thinking. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be a way to put it. I think that mainstream wise, at least everywhere, it is kind of broy. But I have found that like in different places, the culture of like a combination of people that are like somehow educated but also kind of jacked is growing, you know? And
Yeah,
I've seen this
absolutely.
grow. Like, I mean, I'm exposed to it with the pre-script community, obviously, but like in a lot of places, that's it. And at least in what I've seen in Spanish-speaking countries, a lot of that is like the education, so to call it, would be kind of like from bodybuilders and stuff like that. Which I mean, they're huge; they must be doing something right. But a lot of times, it lacks the depth to see like the principles behind it and like the ability to maybe see a little more and apply it to like different people and understand context and all this kind of stuff that we always talk about. So I think the intention is there. There just is a lack of deeper thinking due to the lack, yeah, just availability of information and like this kind of thought processes that we sometimes go through. And yeah, it's a good time to talk to people that are open to it.
Yeah.
The issue I see is sometimes a lot of people, I mean, I guess it's the same everywhere, right? But are kind of set in their ways of
Hmm.
this is what I identify with or as, and this is just what I do for forever and ever.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely see that, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had to kind of travel around and be in different atmospheres, different countries, different gyms, and kind of get a read on that. And it does seem like there is this forward thinking, not just experience based group of coaches that always seems to kind of find each other.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool thing to see, because it sounds like what you're saying is like broy is exactly what broy was for me growing up. And it's like, who's the big dude in the gym? Let's just talk to him and do what he does, which is heavily based in experience, right? Is this person got huge because of the decisions that they made, the choices they made in the gym, and they have experience getting huge. So I'm going to go talk to that person. And I think something that is, I end up saying this on a weekly basis, is that people get strong and people get huge doing really dumb shit all the fucking time. And like, there's a whole other side of this conversation that is drugs, especially when we're talking bodybuilding or hypertrophy training,
Yeah.
which means that more things are going to be effective, whatever that means, even if
Yeah.
they're not the most effective ways to get to the end goal. But, and this is, I got to give credit where credit's due, is that when we were in Bangkok, Baxter brought up this point, is that there's kind of three pillars we want to lean on with this stuff. And it's similar to what like me or Shal will talk about with like evidence based, but evidence informed practice, things like that, is that we're not just working with experience. Experience is one portion of this, one pillar of this. But we also have science. There's science, things that are recreatable and that we can't really deny, like mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy, things like that, or just biomechanics in general. And then there's research. And each of these has its place in its own kind of proportion of importance in decision making in the gym. And, good, bad, whatever, but people start to lean on one side of this versus the other, right? And that's exactly what, the bro culture might be. Maybe that's a better way to say this, is that people that we refer to in that bro culture are people that rely very heavily on their personal experience, or
Yeah.
maybe their experience with their clients, and they don't necessarily, maybe they're closed off to ideas outside of that, or maybe they're just very subscribed to the things that have worked for them personally. And there is merit to that. It's not going to work for everyone, but people that maybe are another avatar of that same person, it may work for. And I think we see a lot of that in coaching in general, is that people tend to coach athletes that are just different avatars of them, right? Because those methodologies might work for people that are a different version of the same person. But I think on the whole, when we're trying to talk about or think about or have conversations with these coaches that maybe are a little more forward thinking, I think we need to consider all three of these pillars, right? We need to think about experience, which I think things should be more heavily weighted towards experience, because that's how we start to build this and we start to understand how to solve problems, is because of our personal experience and the collective experience of those that, we have conversations around this stuff with. But also, we can't ignore scientific principles. These are things that are going to inform the decisions that we make that then play into our experience. Absolutely. And then research is something that's there that I think of as a consideration, right?
Yeah.
Research says that this has been shown in this specific scenario, which is very kind of like the eye of the needle, this small portion, or this very, very specific sample size that has shown specific results, which some people lean a little bit too heavily into that. Especially, I think it can be very buzzwordy on the internet, and people like to stir the pot with claims that maybe are backed by research, and then they lean on the fact that it's backed by research. But a lot of times when we look at research, it's like a group of, I don't know, 20 to 30-year-old non-trained individuals that showed some sort of adaptation that may be minorly significant against some sort of stimulus, which is like, you take any 20 people between the age of 20 or 30 and you have them do anything, there's probably going to be some sort of change. So I think understanding, all these different areas of what's going to influence the decisions that we make in the gym, that's going to be kind of that conversation piece, the thing that brings, people like you and me and, all the other pre-script coaches all over the world together. And those are the things that we can start to have an informed decision about, is that, okay, this is what I'm doing, but maybe more importantly, this is why I'm doing it. And then I can start to pull from your experience. You can start to pull from my experience, and we can have those conversations. And then it kind of refines our thought process when we understand the why behind it. So,
yeah. And I think what you said about, like, is this going to affect my decision making once I'm in the gym, is a pretty important part, because I think that a lot of times we can get lost into like going deep into the research of X, Y, or Z topic, and like really understanding. And I mean, if you're a coach and this is what you do for a living, you should probably go deeper. But I think too many times we get lost in the idea of like really knowing whatever concept. And at the end of the day, like if that's not going to affect the decisions you're making once you're on the floor with yourself or with your client, then like maybe your time could be better spent otherwise, just like understanding other principles and stuff like that, instead of just, let's say, understanding things that are like Instagram worthy, like, oh, the big words and all this stuff that's going to get a lot of clicks, but like, is it really going to affect how you program, or is it really going to affect how you approach your clients, or this kind of stuff? And those at the end of the day are like the things that matter. It's the things that will make a difference either in a positive or negative direction, but we can kind of like take those pinpoints to as information for future decisions, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the way that works in my brain is that there's all of this lives in application, right? Is that's what we transfer from our brain to our client, right? Is the application of this, and then that elicits outcome, right? But the thing that we have to understand before that is it's going to be theory, right? What exists in our brain then gets transferred into and informs the application, and the application is going to predict the outcome. So I think that's the process that we go through with this. And what we need to understand is that our clients don't give a fuck about the theory most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Some of them do, and that's awesome. And I love to have that conversation. I love when people ask why. And I love to ask why. I do it all the fucking time. But we need to understand that theory, that exists up here. It doesn't exist on the gym floor. So we need to be able to interpret that theory and make actionable decisions from those things that we're learning that we can then transfer to our client to elicit the outcome that we're trying to get. And that whole process That is experience, is what that is that I need to refine my thought process so that I can make decisions about how to apply these ideas to the client so they can get the outcomes that they're looking for. So I think that's, maybe a way to think about this, that we're understanding that there needs to be actionable takeaways, right? And people love to exist in that realm of theory and kind of debate and go back and forth about these very nuanced, very, very kind of finite details about all this stuff, when really whatever the outcome of that conversation is, it's not going to have any sort of impact on the application. So it almost negates the need to even have that conversation a lot of times.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, because I'm like, you went through like formal education for many years. How did you come to that like realization once you're in school? Because I feel like, I don't know how education is there, but I feel like here, at least in the what regards to the human body, there's a lot of concepts taught in isolation, and sometimes I see a disconnect into like real world application, or like people that are actually lifting or whatever, or like recovering from an injury. Like there's a lot of concepts. Same thing we talked about in like L1 and stuff. Like, okay, rotator cuff does this, but how does this translate into someone that's actually trying to recover for something like that? How was that? How did that click in your mind? Like way back when you were in school, and brought it to all the way here.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I love how you turn this around on me now, by the way.
I'm trying to extract information for people here, you know?
And that's why I love you. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. It makes me think of questions for you also. But I guess the best way for me to answer that is it's probably not very different, right?
Yeah.
I think this way of thinking is something that, again, to kind of bring it back to where we just were, it's born in application. So to give you a little context around that statement is that I grew up wrestling, and kind of, wrestling was what to me what football was to you. So I was introduced to kind of more formal. I'll use that term very loosely, but if anyone's ever been through team sports training, you know why. But I was introduced to weight training and weight training for sport through wrestling at probably 12 years old is when I started that. Um, so then through college, I wrestled and I continued to train, and I had a deeper love for it's. If anyone's listened to the early episodes of the podcast, it was always fucking garbage day when we record a podcast, and
I
it's
remember
fucking
that.
garbage day. Can you hear this garbage truck outside the window right? So, anyways, aside from it being garbage day here in Santa Clara, California, um, the thing that I liked most about any sport I ever played was getting stronger in the gym. So it was that was the thing that I had the most. Thank you. Yes. That was the thing I had the most passion for, was just strength training in general. And that's evolved into different things over the years. But basically, as I finished college, I got into chiropractic school. My intention in everything that I learned in school was, how does this translate to making me stronger or making me perform better in the gym? So that's the application piece. So school is, especially chiropractic school, it's almost 100% theory. Chiropractic is the biggest crock of shit. But they do a great job at teaching biomechanics from the joint level to the global level. So from a very local to a regional to a global level, which is really fucking cool if you can start to take that out of that sphere of chiropractic and see how that applies in cooler things like strength training or just human movement in general, sports performance, things like that. So that's exactly how I started to learn and be informed on these type of things is, okay, I learned what a rotator cuff is. It's this group of four muscles that goes from either side of the scapula and attaches to the humerus. Okay, it does abduction, it does external rotation, internal rotation. Sweet. But there's this other word, and this stuff does get taught, I think, in any scenario in isolation is okay. Um, infraspinatus, external rotator of the shoulder. Sweet. But what happens when we use all four of these rotator cuff muscles as part of a movement system, it's going to create joint centration, which is a word that you learn in school, and it doesn't really mean much, and there's not much importance on it. But that's in, the prescript courses we'll define as muscle function, right? Is the function of the rotator cuff is joint centration of the glenohumeral joint so that we can maintain some level of structural stability and either transfer or produce force through that joint. So that's what we're looking to do through shoulder. That's shoulder function. That's rotator cuff function. So as you start to go through and you start to think about movements, and I think that's one of the big things that learning these things in isolation forced me to do is, okay, I know all these facts about these muscles and this joint and whatever it is, but what's actually happening as we go through, I was doing CrossFit at the time. So what's actually happening as we go through a muscle up? And it forces you to sit with that movement that if you don't have a system or some sort of systemic way of thinking around this stuff, it makes it hard to really interpret what's going on, to just look at movement and be like, I don't know, the shoulder goes from here to here. But if you look, okay, I'm starting in this end range flexion, debatably overhead shoulder extension with internal rotation. I'm going through shoulder extension as I externally rotate and adduct, and then I'm going back into shoulder extension with internal rotation. Okay, this is this crazy series of events that's happening. But if we start to look joint by joint, what's happening, what's contributing, and we start to think, okay, this portion and I like to think of rotation at the shoulder, rotation in general, as an arc, right? I think that's an appropriate way to think about it, is that as I go through this arc of rotation, it's not that it's just external rotation, internal rotation. It's how am I tipping back and forth between those scales? And you start to just formulate these thoughts of ways that you can make this stuff easier for yourself to digest. And then once you can digest this and you can think about it in a reproducible, recreatable way, is that then it makes it a lot easier to communicate these things or notice specific things that might not be happening as you start to coach someone and you start to look at their movement. Is that this is what my theoretical ideal model might look like of this specific movement. And again, kind of going back to that statement I made earlier, is that theory exists up here. How can we turn theory into application? Is that, okay, I have this theoretical model of what a muscle up should look like, what a snatch, what a back squat, what a bench press, whatever the movement is, what that should look like. As I look at this person, they're not doing this thing that I deem necessary in that theoretical model. So the way that my mind works with corrections or cueing is that we need to address the first issue that goes wrong, because the way that time works is that's going to alter everything after that, right? So we start to pick out, okay, what's the first thing that's going wrong? Let's intervene with that, and let's make that look more like that theoretical model. Now, what is an action step I can take to make them go from this side of the arc of rotation to this side of the arc of rotation? And maybe that's adding something into their prep drills. Maybe that's just a verbal cue or a tactile cue that you can give that person. Maybe it's an ancillary movement that's going to exaggerate that portion of that range of motion to get them to build awareness around how to put their body there, like proprioception type stuff. But that's where this stuff has to start. It starts in the theory, and then it moves into that application, that action step. And then after that, you get the outcome. And then once you go through that cycle over and over again, you really start to understand how to make specific corrections. And that's just refining the process of coaching. That's refining your thought process around, maybe it's movement, maybe it's around communication. I think that's a big part of this. And that's, I've said that word a couple times, but I think the better that you understand the theory, the more effective you can be in communicating it. Because if you understand every single way that we can look at this movement, the bench press, the muscle up, the snatch, and we see something from this angle that maybe we couldn't see from this angle, then we still understand, okay, this is the same portion of the movement that we need to make a correction. And we can just be effective in communicating. Or sometimes communicating isn't words. Communicating is a different movement on the spreadsheet, or a tempo on the spreadsheet. It could be things as subtle as that. It doesn't have to be this big, long conversation. Is you can communicate with your clients through the things that you have them do. And that is a means of communication with them. So that's where I think that to take it back to your original question that I've deviated so far from, is the way that this stuff is taught. I think is probably taught very similarly. Anatomy is very objective, right? It's, this is a supraspinatus, this is an infraspinatus, whatever. This is origin, insertion, innervation, action, blood supply. Cool. That's very objective. These are things that are probably very true in most people. But how it exists in application is there's a little bit more nuance to that. And there's, like, we talk about this in the prescript level 1, but like anatomical variations. And if you understand, just some of these underlying principles, which is another word we haven't really brought up yet, but principles are going to be the ways, the things that are kind of just truths that we understand, a way of the ways that these things operate in isolation, in a system, but just some truths around movement, I guess. And if we can understand these principles, then we can start to apply them when there isn't necessarily a system set in place, right? Is that, infraspinatus, external rotator, sweet. But what happens, if this person has a full thickness tear of the rotator cuff? Infraspinatus is not rotating shit. So we need to start to be able to think and, use other principles that we've learned about shoulder mechanics and maybe some sort of assessment or observations that we're making to understand what the appropriate intervention for that person might be. So the way, I still don't think I got back to answering your question, but all of this is to say that, yeah, I hope so. All of this is to say that even though it's taught in isolation, the way that you can learn these principles and the way that you can learn to that these exist in theory and apply and get an outcome with them is just by doing them. And that's exactly it, doing them and thinking about them. And it takes time and have conversations. I think, and I don't want this to be like a prescript commercial, but luckily and thankfully throughout the last 5, 6, 7 years is that now there's this network of people that you can just go to. And I'm sure things like this existed when I was in school. It just wasn't as apparent to me, but talking to people that have struggled through the things that you're struggling through and having conversations with them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that connection part specifically has been a great part for me, especially when like exploring new principles or like going through different courses, having the advantage of like a messaging grid path and thinking like, hey, this is how I see it. What do you think? Has definitely brought a big like plus into my life. And on the application side, I remember, I forget which one of the prescript courses I was taking when we were back on lockdown. And I couldn't go to the gym. And I remember it was really hard to like comprehend these principles because I couldn't go the same day and like try to figure out what was actually happening on the gym floor, And I remember, I think like midway through the course, gyms opened back up. And then I could just take the lecture in the morning and then go to the gym and try and figure out what was happening and then come back with more questions. So I think just the ability to do that and the curiosity of like, okay, maybe if I swap this around, or how does this look like that in different scenarios, helps further understanding and just like a full grasp of the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's only so many different ways that we can move our bodies. I mean, there's actually a ton of fucking different ways, maybe an infinite amount of ways, but understanding like the arcs of movement, like if we just think through the 3 planes, there's only, so much capacity to move through these 3 planes with our body. So once we start to understand those principles about what happens as we go through shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, shoulder adduction, shoulder abduction, then it makes it a lot easier. Because if we can identify shoulder flexion, we kind of have this idea in our head. Okay, shoulder flexion, we're probably going to have some degree of external rotation. We're looking at scapular upward rotation. This is what needs to happen at the rib cage. This is what needs to happen at the core. So it kind of, once we start to build these out and we understand movement in a area, that transfers out and that kind of ripples and overlaps with other areas of the body. And then we can start to, have that theory in our head is, I think this is what's going to happen when I put my hand over my head. And you know what? I can try and put my hand over my head and I can observe, oh, yeah, the thing I thought was going to happen happened. And then that's taking theory and turning it into application. And I think that's a really important thing right now is because there's so many coaches right now, that have started coaching or training, whatever the word might be, online as opposed to in person.
Yeah.
So it's almost this place or this time that we're in where this stuff can only exist in theory to that coach. Is if you've
Yeah.
never had an in-person client and all your clients are online, it all exists in theory. So it goes basically from theory to outcome. And you're missing that kind of intermediate of application. Of course, the application is the words on the sheet and all that and the things that your clients are doing in the gym, but you don't get that real-time feedback. There's no real repercussions around what you're doing. Is that maybe you communicate with that person once a week or however often you have check-ins with them. Is that it's not the same as you have a clipboard and a piece of paper with an exercise plan for the day for a client. You go and you get on the gym floor, and there's real time implications to the decisions that you're making. And it's it's still the case to some degree, but it's a very different scenario. And it's a very different feedback uh, experience, I guess you could say, is that you can observe this, you can ask them questions in the moment when you have a real life client, and it makes this process very apparent that we're going from, okay, this is theory, this is the session that I planned for this person, this is the application of it, and that's a back and forth. The application is a conversation, and that makes
Yeah.
it maybe more efficient. I'd hope more efficient to find that outcome versus, okay, this exists in theory. I'm going to put this theory on a spreadsheet and then talk to this person a week later and we'll see how it went. So that's kind of, that's a place where I think it becomes that much. Well, this is a time and place where I think it becomes that much more important for people to understand how this stuff exists in application, and not just on themselves, but in a variety of people, in basically every single one of your clients. So that conversation part of it, I think that's becoming more and more necessary because it's becoming less and less common.
Yeah, and I think just working in person with people allows you to understand that you're actually working with people. Like if you've only seen them like maybe through like an intake Zoom call or whatever, or a call or email, like maybe not even face to face. It's sometimes I feel like it's easy to like lose sense that this is a real person that you're sending and that they actually go into the gym and that some things may hurt or some exercise may not go as you planned. And if you've worked with people in person, you've seen that, you've seen the client struggle, you've seen someone maybe not motivated and that impacts their performance, or you've seen like all these things that can happen once you're in the floor with someone. And I feel like that plays a lot into how you can coach. Like if you're coaching online, how you can coach online, because you understand that there's more than just a spreadsheet that you're prescribing, but there's like a bunch of like human factors that can come into place, or communication skills that need to be applied with different types of individuals to facilitate outcome, but also to like give your client a good experience depending on who the client is and all this kind of stuff. And even just like pattern recognition, like if you've seen, okay, I know how lack of hip extension and internal rotation looks like on someone because I've seen it a bunch of times, then maybe when someone sends an assessment video, you can take it right away. But if you only see ever like pictures, it may be harder to like identify this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's the experience part of this. And that's why I'll never take away from experience, but it should not be the only thing that we lean on in our decision making. But the more experience you gather, then it becomes more potent in the way that you apply that. Is that if I've seen this once, I don't have experience. If I've seen this 100 times, all right, I'm pretty well informed through that experience of what this is going to manifest as and the implications that come from that. So that's something to take into account too, is that it almost stifles your ability to get experience working with clients that you don't get that immediate feedback, right? Is that you do get experience in certain ways. And I think I'm not trying to shit on or take away from online coaching as a business, because it's something that I do, it's something that you do, it's something that everyone I interact with on a day-to-day basis does. And I think that's awesome. I think it's really cool that in both ways, is that people can find a trainer or a coach that really resonates with them and they can work with them regardless of geographic location. and it gives trainers and coaches a wider reach, which I think is fucking awesome, because I think there's a lot of really good trainers and coaches out there, but I think it's scarce in terms of geographical area. So I think on the whole, online coaching is awesome and it's great for a lot of people in the industry. But at the same time, there's the other side of this that makes it a business. So it's there's good coaches that may not be great at running a business, and then there's not so great coaches that are really good at running a business. So I don't think there's a direct correlation there to how well someone does with online coaching to how good of a coach they actually are. But I'm kind of, again, just kind of getting away from my point. I've had a lot of espresso today, by the way.
As you should.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting away from the point of that. This, as you accumulate experience in whatever you're doing, whether it's in person, then you get better at identifying patterns, pattern recognition, like you said, and intervening with that. Online, you maybe get better at recognizing the stuff in a different way, and you have to get better at recognizing the stuff in a different way. So I think that's, to give these online coaches their credit is that you have to be a very effective communicator in different ways to be an effective online coach than you would in person, because you have all the tools at your disposal when you're face to face with someone. When you just have, a Zoom call or a FaceTime or a text message thread with someone and a spreadsheet, you have to be a lot more concise with your message, and it has to be very impactful. So I think that's something that can be helpful on the online coaching side of things, is that I think there's a lot of benefit to both of these. And I personally, online coaching, adapting over COVID to online coaching was a struggle for me, because I realized that I wasn't as effective in some of these areas of communication that I needed to be to elicit the results that I wanted to get. So that was a really cool realization for me, and experience for me to go through, is that, okay, if I can get better at this, it's only going to enhance what I do over here. And I think that's a really good way to look at this for a lot of people that maybe do that hybrid model, or they're on one side or the other. I think there is benefit to doing the thing that you don't do in a lot of scenarios, but learn, it's just going to force you to round out your skill set. To maybe in person, you rely really heavily on verbal cues and tactile cues in the moment, versus you can't do that online. So you're going to have to be really reliant on recognizing these patterns and figuring out a solution to that, maybe through exercise selection and a few cues or a quick conversation that you can have with that person.
Yeah, and kind of taking it back to like real life application, something I learned when transitioning to online during the COVID as well was that, like, we even make fun a little bit of the word like optimal when we're talking, but I feel like a lot of times people get so much into like, okay, what's the best exercise to do here? And a big struggle for me when I changed to online was that, okay, I know that ideally this would be what I prescribe to this person, and if I was there, I could make sure that it was being executed properly. But I know without my presence, likely this or this is going to go wrong. So you kind of have to get creative on like, okay, maybe we'll regress the pattern a little, or we're going to have to set some constraints, or we're going to have to do some extra movement prep, or whatever it may be, just to get the outcome you wanted. And sometimes what in theory should work or should be the best option has to go to like one step lower, so you can actually achieve what you want to achieve, knowing the circumstances that you are on or your client is on, knowing that maybe they lack a little bit of proprioception, or whatever it may be. But I think it's a skill that has to be developed, and I'm happy I figured it out kind of early, but it was definitely something that took a little bit of time.
Yeah. And it's a skill. It's a skill that you have to refine, you have to sharpen. And I really like that outlook on it. I have a similar way of thinking about coaching, and I think the words that I put to it is solving problems that never happened. Is that you almost have to predict what's going to go wrong, and then you want to catch it before they get to that point, or you want to have some sort of intervention around the thing that you can tell is going to go wrong because of your experience and because of the things that you've seen in the past that kind of lead you to believe that however this person is moving, there's going to be a bottleneck down the line if we continue to progress. So let's take it a step back, let's regress, and let's address the thing that's going to be the bottleneck so that by the time we get to that point in the program, they're going to have success in what they're doing because we've already equated for the thing that was going to break down. And I think that's a really valuable way to look at coaching for a couple of reasons. First is that you're going to ensure prolonged progress for your clients, which is going to help you in the long run because that means that you have happy clients, you have better client retention, and you're building better trust with them. Is that if you can see something that's going to go wrong and you prevent that from going wrong and you can effectively communicate that process to them, you're going to get a lot of buy-in, a lot of trust, especially if you can actually deliver on that. Hopefully you can deliver on that. But I think that's a really valuable way of looking at this process. And that's really what we're here to do, is we're here to use our experience to make someone else's experience more smooth than ours was. Or, in reality, more smooth than the person before them and the person before that person. Is that, it's all a skill. And we're always trying to refine that and improve that. And I'll tell you, there's people that I worked with online early pandemic days that I don't necessarily feel bad because I definitely helped them, but still, I could be much more effective in doing what we did now than I was 2 years ago. But that's just because I've refined that skill.
Yeah, and when talking about like trying to solve stuff that goes down the line, one of the things that at first I struggled to get my head around, and I think that I don't know how it is like in the States or in Canada, but at least here, the idea of like creating these long runways of progression and maybe like not doing maximized gain for 3 months and then maximize gains for the next 3 months and then just doing like all output, doing everything that will give me the most amount right now, and maybe thinking a little bit ahead in the future, like setting yourself up for success. Like I had always programmed for myself, and even though I try to do this, I always want to push a little harder, so I would add a little extra. And now, like being with Mac, and he's can be more objective. He has done like a long base phase, or like slow start to GPP and stuff like this, and just like preparing for the future, creating movement strategies, doing all this stuff that I think can be highly beneficial, and maybe just kind of like switching that mindset from like we're always trying to make gains, but like you don't need to make all the gains right now at the expense of maybe having to stall for a couple of months or getting injured or whatever it may be in the future.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because progress happens over time, right? And a lot of people, they get in the mindset of I want it right now, or this session is make or break, which is almost literally never the case. Is that the thing that's going to be, and I tell this is funny because you can have this conversation with anyone, no matter where they're at in their training lifespan, or whatever their training age is. But I use this around rehab a lot, is that as we go and we look at this, it's not going to be necessarily any one session that's make or break. The thing that's going to predict your progress over time is sustainability. Right? What is a sustainable model that we can have around our exercise regimen that's going to allow us to have continual growth over time? Because it's not, even strength training, like you could even look at like this is fresh in my brain because these are the type of athletes I work with, is an Olympic weightlifter that wants to compete at nationals. Nationals happens on a 1-year basis. Is that this year is not make or break. You don't want to be someone that, peaks for 1 year and then is so fucked that they can't compete again. You should strive to have continual progress from this year to next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. And it's reasonable to think that you can draw these out as long as that person, there's going to be some sort of factors that are going to limit people eventually, like injuries, age, hormone profile. But you can draw these things out for a pretty long time. I mean, I'd say someone in a strength sport, you can probably peak into your 30s. And that's fucking sick. And even after that, if you haven't fucked yourself up in that time, you can continue to do that sport for enjoyment. Because a lot of times people get out of a sport because they get either burnt out on it, is that they hit those mental barriers, which means that they're just simply not enjoying what they're doing. Enjoyment a lot of times comes from variance and novelty in training.
Yeah.
And another thing is, if you're in pain session after session, that's going to wear on you mentally, and you're not going to have fun. It's not fun to be in pain as you're doing the thing that should be fun. So making sure that you can keep people healthy, there's enough variance in the program to keep it interesting and kind of, keep them chasing after something. I think those are really important. And when it comes to progression, and you kind of referred to this like GPP and base phase and all that. There's ways that this should happen, that this can happen, that really draws it out. You used runway of progression, right? That's Killian Hamiltonism. That's hard to say, by the way. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. If we have these micro progressions, these small progressions, and it doesn't even have to be week to week. Is it, say we have, I've seen the way Mac programs, what is it, like 4 or 5 movements a day, 4 or 5 days a week, something like that?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of, and that's like it doesn't even have to be Mac, but maybe that's a general way to program is, okay, so say we'll say 5 movements a day, 5 days a week, that's 25 movements. What if we progress one thing each week? That gives us 25 areas that we can progress, over a span of, realistically 25 weeks, that it doesn't have to be a lot of the bulk of the program is going to remain the same. It might just be one thing or 2 things a week that we're focusing on, that we're progressing. So I think that gets lost a lot of times, is that, especially with online coaching, it's a 4-week billing cycle. Okay, so over the span of 4 weeks, I'm going to send you 4 weeks of programming, and then 4 weeks from now, you're going to have a totally different program just to keep you engaged and keep it novel. Is that's not necessarily how this stuff works. It's, the last 4 weeks and this 4 weeks might be the same, but the dumbbell's in a different hand, or anterior load moves to posterior load, or, it's the exercise order changes, things like that. And I think those are the things that people, especially with, hypertrophy training, a little, strength training is pretty monotonous too, but it's all fucking monotonous. But the way that you can draw out that progression is first by making the appropriate progressions at the appropriate rate, not just because it's a new billing cycle. Yep. And another principle that I like to use guiding program design is the idea of phase potentiation. And that's really a strength training principle, but it cross applies in different areas. Is that essentially the phase of training that we're in right now is meant to set us up for success and enhance the effects of the subsequent training phase. Is that like that kind of model? Is that we're going to go from a base phase that's maybe more restorative and function based, and then we're going to go to a GPP phase, starting to maybe buffer our capacity to create joint stability through more demanding ranges of motion. And then from there, we're going to go into a more specific strength phase where we're starting to build top end strength. And then after that, strength turns into power, where we're starting to be strong fast. And then from there, power turns into sport specific or whatever, that general, that's a very general periodization model. But the idea is that's for a reason. And the reason is that it fucking works. That each of those adaptations is going to elicit a more effective adaptation in the following cycle, as long as we're doing these things correctly and we have a decent understanding of how to elicit that adaptation. So I think those are important things to think about when we're talking about progression and our clients' training age and I'd say training life cycle. Really is we can prolong that life cycle. We don't want them to die out on us. And if we're doing that appropriately, it's just going to allow them to have continued progress over a long period of time. And they're not going to have as many hangups as, things like injuries or things like them getting really run down and not able to recover through training if you're doing this stuff appropriately.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend that I'm working with right now. And he competed in powerlifting at like a fairly high level. And he was telling me that he realized that if he could stay healthy long enough, eventually there would be enough like training cycles connected that he would be better than most people that like maybe started at the same time and peaked, and then they had to like call it on their careers, powerlifting careers per se, and that's kind of what he did. Not to say that he didn't have some crazy training cycles, but if you can kind of string multiple blocks or faces together and then just kind of do that for a long time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's severely underrated.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's why you should never buy an 8-week squat cycle on the internet. It's
Yeah.
because why the fuck? It doesn't matter. Just train and adjust your training according to the progress that you're having. It doesn't need to fit into 8 weeks. It doesn't need to fit into 12 weeks. It doesn't need to fit into this nice box that someone packaged it in for you. It's that just do the thing until you get diminishing returns and then change the thing. And then do that thing until you get diminishing returns and then change that thing. And then just do that until the rest of forever. And you'll probably be bigger and you'll probably be stronger and you'll probably be healthier than a lot of people that don't understand that process.
Yeah, I think that could be the rough part, as we talked. Like, coaches usually bill every 4-ish weeks, so it's like, okay, I'm going to give you kind of the same program, but then I think that falls into what Shallow always says, that it's what you say, we program computers, but we coach people. So it's like the spreadsheet is only a part of what you're doing, right? Like, just because the words on the computer are virtually the same doesn't mean that you're not progressing or adding value in other means.
Yeah, that's so true. And I can't tell you how many times in my training career, for me personally, I have like a note in my phone that has 4 days of programming with like a couple movements under each. And that's all it is. Like, it's okay, Monday, I'm going to hang snatch and snatch. I'm going to snatch pull. I'm going to front squat. And then I'm going to do walking lunges. All right. That's my Monday program until I can't have any more progress with that. And it doesn't need to be any more complex than that. And that's, very much simplified for myself because I have experience and I understand autoregulation and progression and things like that. But it doesn't need to be much more than that with a client, as long as you have effective communication. Is that these are the movements we're going to do, and we're going to do these same movements until we can't progress in any more directions. And that could be, it could be qualitative. It could be, it feels better. You have a better understanding of how you're moving. That's another thing to, go off on another tangent about this is I teach a lot of people how to perform the movements, the snatch and the clean and jerk, Olympic lifting. I've done this in person. I've done this online. The people I do this online with, their program probably looks exactly the same for 12 weeks, and I know that's a nice package number, but for a span of a few months at least, they're going to do the same exact thing, same exact volume, same exact words on the sheet. The only difference is we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to see the qualitative part of it. I'm going to see how you're moving. I'm going to qualify that, and I'm going to make corrections based off of that, is because we're not making adaptations that are going to be dependent upon the weight on the bar. We're making adaptations that are going to be dependent on how well you understand how you're moving your body. And that's a big part of this. So I think that's something that can be really helpful. And once you understand, you accept that, you can just be more effective in what you're trying to elicit with the words on the paper. Is that these words don't mean shit. Do the thing. Let's have a better understanding of how to do the thing. And that's always my approach to coaching, is awareness first. Is if we don't have awareness of where we're trying to go and how we're trying to accomplish that, then we're not going to have any sort of meaningful progress, because the progress is just coincidental at that point. Is that yes, you're going through the movements, and by coincidence of going through the movements, you're having progress in these areas, but there's no intention around it. So if we can first build awareness, then our ceiling is going to be so much higher, and then we can really stretch out that training phase. As opposed to, if we're being inefficient how we're doing, then we're going to have to change movements more often. Maybe we're going to have to regress or introduce novelty, because that pinpoint awareness or intention isn't present. But the more you can refine that awareness, is then you can really stretch this out. So I think that's a really good point that you bring up, and that is really valuable for coaches to understand, is that it doesn't have to be different as long as it continues to get better.
Yeah. And I think, like, if there's no awareness, there's no like face potentiation or none of that. Just because is what we're saying, right? Like, in your mind as a coach, you're setting up strategies or movements that lead up to the next phase or block or whatever our program is structured like. But if they're not moving purposefully or if they're not catching the intent of the movement, which is another tangent as well, maybe you're not even reaping the benefits of said movement, right? And it can, I feel like as a coach, that's something that this is a lesson that my econ professor taught us, but he's always told us assume nothing. So he always, in this case, like don't assume that just because your client sees the words, they understand what you want out of whatever exercise you're programming or whatever, or the specific microcycle or whatever. And just, increasing communication, all this stuff can kind of help to ensure that what's in your mind actually comes to reality with your client.
Yeah, I love that. And in assuming nothing, you have to make your clients show you, right? Because you'll be able to recognize if that intention's there. And it's not just visual, but if people are asking the right questions and they're thinking about the right things, it becomes very apparent. So you'll know when it's happening and when it's not. But yeah, that's another one too, especially with the online space, is how many people do you have that just don't fill in spreadsheets? Yeah. And you're left assuming, or you're on the phone with them like, hey, what's going on? Because it's, and that's one of those areas where this can become ineffective too, is when you have to assume, right? Is that doesn't exist when you're face to face with someone, is that you don't have to assume. Maybe you can assume how they're feeling, whatever it might be, but you get very real feedback, real time. But that's a statement that I really like. And I always love things that cross apply. Like that's just, in life, just don't fucking assume.
Yeah, and cross application. I think that when I started getting like nerdier about fitness was when I was in school for economics, and when I realized that like programming was literally the same as econ, just like allocation of resources, this kind of stuff, everything snapped and just like fell into place. It was a lot easier to like navigate these concepts.
That's so beautiful. I love it. And that's such a valuable way to think of this, is that you do have finite resources with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is that we only have so much time. We only have so much effort, so much recovery. I know some of those things are a little more subjective, but still, there's only so much. You can only stretch them so thin before they're going to break. And understanding that and having a concrete kind of idea of that in your head is super helpful.
Yeah.
I love it, man. I also love that, like the nerdy side of you, like you're there in glasses with a bunch of encyclopedias behind you, but you're also 102 kilos of pure fucking biceps. It's amazing.
And it's rough when I have to stand next to Stuart Shallow, that don't feel too big then.
Yeah. Tell me about it, man. Tell me about it. I'm just desensitized.
But you can lift like twice my body weight over your head, so it doesn't even matter.
That's my only saving grace is that I know what to do with the barbell in my hands, but I'm not taking pictures next to any of you motherfuckers.
I just need to find my thing, like I'm not the biggest, but I could do this one thing. That's what I need to find.
That's it. You're the guy with like 4 sets of encyclopedias behind you. I can't even say that. You're that guy, man.
I'll take that,
yeah. Awesome. And this is kind of after the fact. I wanted, to take this time so that people can get familiar with you. I know you're a valuable part of this community, and the most exciting part of all this is that you're going to be taking all this stuff that we talked about, and you're going to be teaching it in a way that none of us have the capacity to do. Is that you're going to be heading up the Prescript Level 1 in Spanish, which is, I think, an amazing thing in general. It gives all of us the opportunity to reach a community that we just literally don't have the knowledge base to reach via you. So my question for you is what's that experience been like in kind of translating all of this stuff and really diving in and getting ready to launch the Prescript Level 1 in Spanish?
At first, it made me really think about. I remember when you guys first launched the L1 Online, and you put out a podcast episode of the spine module.
Yeah. That was like literally one of the lectures. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember listening to that, and I had to play like 3 times because I was like, I don't understand any of these words. I can't keep up, and it made me realize that I didn't really know anything. And it's crazy to think that now I'm going to be teaching it. But it's fun. It's good to see the progress. But it's definitely been like a good adventure of like literally translating the manual, translating the course, understanding how to kind of bring these concepts in a way that people can understand it and in a way that it matters.
Yeah.
I think it might differ a little, and it's just good to be able to know that everything that I feel like I've been privileged in a way that like I was able to meet you guys kind of early and take the courses and kind of like put me on a way that my career could be what I wanted it to be, and to know that I can now be of help to other people to do that, and in the language that I primarily speak is
Yeah.
is pretty cool. And I think it's a cool opportunity, and just to see the way that this has grown in the last couple months or years, it's exciting to see where this is going to go.
That's amazing. And yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for you being part of this and the work you've put in to make this reality. It should be launching off here probably in the next few months. We have
Yeah.
some tentative dates. I'm not going to say it out loud on the podcast so no one holds me to it. Um, but yeah, I think it's amazing that we're able to continue to extend the reach. And really our goal with all of this is just to raise the bar, raise the standard when it comes to education in the strength, conditioning, hypertrophy training space. That's always been the goal, and I appreciate you for being here today and continuing to help us, meet that goal by reaching again a whole group of people that we may have never been able to reach if it weren't for you.
I'm happy to be a part of it. You know it.
Oh man, I appreciate you. Well, thanks for your time today, Jorge. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Uh, if they want to reach out, probably Instagram is the best way. Just my name, so Jorge de Hoyos underscore uh, JORGDHOYOS underscore, and then you can find me there.
Awesome. Yeah. So, any questions you guys have for Jorge, if you're looking to get into the Spanish level one, hit either of us up. Hit us up at. We're gonna have an email account for it.
Yep.
You'll see it. You'll see it'll all be in the show notes. We'll just do that, so I don't have to say the wrong things. But
Yeah.
again, thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure, Jorge. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Of course, man. Take care.